Hi all, this is Dana here. In this video I'm just going to be going over a quick rundown about my setup for sewing. Hopefully some of you can get some good ideas if you're still new to stitching and doing cross-stitch and embroidery, or even if you have done a lot before, you might get some other ideas. So this is just a quick follow-up for the bobbin winding tutorial I gave in my last video. So as you can see here, this is my little setup and how everything is hung on my bobbins. That way I can see all the numbers of the bobbins and use all the threads and whatnot. When I cut some off, I'll take one strand out because I double my strands when I sew, and I'll put the rest around the same bobbin so I can get more later. As you can see here, I'm actually using my Scrollbar frame. So this is an 18-inch Scrollbar frame, and I actually made little legs for it with some scrap wood that was lying around my parents' place. So this is a little front leg here. It's literally just pieces of wood that have a hole drilled in it so that the little nut, sorry, I'm just going to try to focus that, so the little nut can pass through and screw on, and a couple little screws down the bottom. Super simple, and that way this frame can actually sit on my lap and I can adjust the angle. The rear leg is a little bit more advanced, and it's got these 3 holes here so I can adjust the setting and adjust the height. But yeah, exactly the same. It's literally holes drilled in some wood, screwed at the bottom, and then this whole Scrollbar frame can actually sit on my lap. Sorry if it keeps going out of focus. I'm holding the camera in my hand right now. So yes, there's the frame itself and my bobbins. This is a little mini needleminder biscornu thing. It's actually got a magnet on the back, and there's a magnet inside here as well. I've got the pattern for this on my website. I'll put a link to that in the description below. Really simple little project to make. You can either put your pins and needles and whatnot into it because it's stuffed, or you can see it's just sitting on top because it is magnetic, so the magnets are pretty strong and they hold it on. And this is the newest piece I'm working on. This is my newest design. I'm just doing a sample stitch of it just to make sure everything's looking how I want it to before I release it onto my website. As I mentioned in the last video, all these new patterns I'm working on will be released onto my shop page, which is at handylittlegadget.ca/shop. They'll be there once they're released. And another thing to note too with the Scrollbar frame, even though obviously I'm working on a narrower piece of fabric and it's not covering the full width, for me it's actually easier using the frame like this because it can sit on my lap. I've got a neck injury, so I can't hold things in my hand for very long. So this actually works really, really well for me as far as I can stitch while I'm reclined. I don't have to hold it. I can put my hands underneath, so one hand goes in the back and then one hand on top. And it's just a really, really comfortable way for me to stitch, and I can adjust the height by adjusting the angle on these legs just by loosening the nuts a little bit. It works really, really well for me. And literally it was just scraps of wood that were lying around, so really cheap to make too. Even at a hardware store you could probably ask them to cut you a few bits of wood to the right length and just throw some holes in it with a drill. So you can see here, this is actually the top edge of my fabric, and I stitched it on with a contrasting thread just so I can cut it easier later. Some people would say that you have to stitch every single time there's a hole in your thread, so this is 14 counts, it'd be 14 stitches per the inch. I wasn't feeling very well last night when I stitched this on, so I just stitched it enough that it's going to hold the tension fine, but I didn't want to go completely crazy. The one thing, if you've never stitched onto the canvas that's attached to most Scrollbar frames, one thing to note is you should always try to make sure that the row on your fabric here that is lining up with the edge of your canvas here, that row is the same row, I can't really see it, that is going to line up here. And that way your fabric is going to be laying straight, and that way when you're rolling your scroll up and down, it's actually going to roll straight. It's not going to start to skew, or your tension's not going to be out of whack. So same thing with the bottom. And one thing to note too, the way I've rolled this, sorry if I keep moving the camera around, I'm trying to show you a bunch of stuff. You can see here, I've rolled it so that this actually rolls under. So a lot of people would roll it so that your stitching surface is on the top, which makes sense until you realize that if you do it this way, so that your stitching surface will actually roll up and around this way so the inside is protected when it's rolled around. That way when you're resting your hands on your frame, if you do this with your one hand while you're stitching, you're actually touching the back side of your fabric. You're not touching the side that you're going to be stitching with. And as you can see in this pattern, I haven't gridded my fabric. It's literally like 56 stitches square, each little panel that I'm doing, so it wasn't really worth me to grid the fabric. I can just count, and obviously if I'm not gridding, I am double checking. I did make some little holes in the fabric just here, just to mark my upper corner. But that'll obviously be covered with a stitch at some point when I get to that color. So yeah, for smaller pieces I don't bother gridding. I do have a video about how to grid your fabric. I'll put the link to that in the video description as well. But yeah, for smaller pieces I don't bother gridding. I can just count and then double check and make sure that everything's in the right place, and then you start building your colors off of the colors that are already there. And one more little detail that you might have noticed, this is actually an old phone, so it's got a broken screen, but this is how I actually stitch. I'll take a photograph of my pattern and then zoom in and zoom out using my phone as my pattern holder. That way I don't have to turn my head. I can look right here, which is a lot easier for me than using a paper pattern. A lot of people use highlighters, they'll mark off their pattern with pencil, they'll use PDF readers. There's so many different ways to follow a pattern. It really does depend on what is most comfortable for you. For me, this is the easiest way, and I've got this little spider thingy I got from Michael's little cell phone holder. So that works for me really well because I can't turn my head. And also you can see my little legend that I've made here with all my stitches and whatnot. That way I can follow my pattern a lot easier and know which color number I'm working on next. And in the last video I talked about a little box that can hold your bobbins. That's my little box here. You can see it's a little plastic box. You can put normal spools of thread or your bobbins and whatnot and your excess threads in there. So those are usually sold in the same places that you can get your plastic bobbins, which is usually the same place you can get your floss, which makes it convenient. So yeah, that's it for now. This is how I stitch. So I hope you've gotten a few different ideas about ways you can either experiment with, or ways you can try stitching yourself or setting up your stitching in a different way. Like I said, this is using a Scrollbar frame. Some people like using the Q-snaps, which are these little plastic, almost like plumbing pipe type looking ones. Some people like embroidery hoops or tension hoops. Lots of different ways. It's just all a matter of personal taste and what you find the most comfortable to stitch with. So that's it for now. If you have any questions, please feel free to let me know in the comments below, and I'll talk to you later. Bye for now!